Give on the go. Give with ease. Seven platforms, one system. Give from everywhere. SecureGive.
Welcome everybody to today's webinar. We are so glad that you guys are joining us today on this Tuesday afternoon. We've got a great topic we're going to be diving into. So we're going to be looking at trends in church attendance and giving. And I'm going to introduce our guest in just a second. But just to kind of set up this topic a little bit, Dunham Company has been doing research for the last 5 years, looking year over year what's happening in the way church attendees specifically are donating to charities, and also how they're donating to churches, to places of worship, and to ministries in general. And so we're going to be able to see what happened pre-COVID, what happened during the pandemic, what happened coming out of the pandemic, and what are we seeing now? What can we expect to see? So it's a really great topic, and I'm glad that you're here for it today. Before we get started, just want to go ahead and mention, if you have questions as we're going through this content, we absolutely want to answer those questions. So use that Q&A panel to submit those questions. So at the bottom bar in your Zoom screen there, hit that Q&A button. It'll open a window and you can send those questions to us. We're going to answer some as we go as best we can, but if we don't hit your question as we're going, don't worry. At the end, we're going to have some dedicated time to make sure we answer as many questions as we can, and also make sure that you have more time, even at that spot, to ask some more questions of us. So again, glad you're here. We're looking at church attendance and giving trends over these last 5 years. And so I want to introduce to you today Josh Crowther. Josh is the global COO at Dunham Company, and he has a passion for doing research. He has a passion for the church, and he's been doing this for 17 years. He's been at it for a long time, and so he's going to share some really great data and some great insights with us. So welcome, Josh. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you guys today. The data we're going to look at, and hopefully you can see my screen there now sharing. The data we're looking at actually came from a very simple question that we asked. There was an interesting opinion article that came out about 6 months ago that said evangelical giving is seeing this precipitous decline, and we're in real trouble in terms of faith-based giving. And so we asked the question, knowing we had this bank of data. In fact, we're going to be looking at the last 5 years here because we know how much the environment has changed in the last 5 years. But we have a bank of research that goes back a decade at looking specifically at giving at a macro level, giving from those who attend church regularly and those who attend church weekly. So looking at those groups, and we've been able to pull them apart and distinguish what kind of giving behavior looks like for those different groups. And so as we look into this research, really was to answer that question, has evangelical giving really dropped as the general market has reported? Partly because we're passionate about the church. We want to see the church continue to take ground in this world in which we live in, because we know how critical that mission is. And giving is a key indicator in engagement. And sometimes we look at engagement levels and know that that's tied to giving. And sometimes giving is a good indicator of engagement levels. So again, as we look at this data and look forward at these 5 years, and we look back to pre-pandemic and knowing how much has changed in that time, we'll be stopping down at each of these parts. So in terms of the methodology of the research, this was done, there were 15-minute online surveys with each of these panelists, so you can have confidence in the numbers. The margin of error is 95%, so pretty typical for a research piece. And they have a 3.8% margin of error. So wherever we can see a significant shift, and most of these data points will be more significant than that margin of error. So we know pretty well that each data point will show as we go indicates a pretty significant shift in giving. As we look through this data, know that, again, we've got a benchmarking over a decade of this giving research, and we're going to show you the last 5 years. Again, the most significant shifts in giving have happened over the last 5 years, and each year is very, very different from the one before it. And you'll see that as we present these numbers. So that's the methodology. If you got any questions on that, feel free to ask. This is research we do regularly. It comes from our donor confidence survey, so looking at not only the giving levels, but also what's driving those giving levels. So again, that gives us some additional information to share with you today. So when we look at that group of all church attenders, so that's people who are attending church monthly, those who attend every other week, those who attend weekly. So looking at that entire group, or more than weekly, looking at that entire group, the reality is that giving over the last 5 years has in fact gone down. So when we look at that macro trend, and that's to all charity, including church. So if we look at all of the giving from those groups that are attending church regularly, we can see that from the peak in 2019, so that was the highest level of giving from this group that we've ever seen in the history of the country, that height from that peak in 2019, since COVID, and several other factors like inflation, factors like the increase in the standard deduction from the Jobs Act, those things have had an impact on total giving. And we know it's had an impact on total giving because of other research that's out there. But looking at this group of church attenders, again, you can see this decline, $2,600 down to $2,500 in the COVID year. So interestingly, that first year of giving actually didn't decline as much as we may have expected. In fact, it was almost like there was an emergency response to the very real situation that was happening on the ground in communities. And as we pass this data and we look at where were they giving, you'll see where people started giving to. But $2,500 in 2020. In 2021, we actually did 2 surveys in 2020 at the start of the year and at the end of the year, because obviously that was a very big year. So that's a melon number there in 2020. So we didn't do a study in 2021. Then we jumped to 2022. It's interesting. And this is actually what we call the bottoming out year. This is the year of lowest giving that we have seen in about a decade of giving from this group of donors specifically. So this is all church attenders. And looking at that group, it dropped to $1,700. So that's their total annual giving from that group who are attending church monthly, weekly, every other week. From there, in 2022, we saw a rise in giving, which is actually the most encouraging sign. And you'll see this all the way through the research. As we take each segment and look at it in more detail, you'll see that the rebound of about 20% in donations from 2022 to 2023 is reflected in all of these data points that you see. Now, that is a very encouraging sign. As someone who cares about people giving and giving generously, this is for sure what I would call the beginnings of a recovery. And so that beginning of a recovery in 2023, which is their last year, full year of giving, and I would expect that trend to continue for 2024. Again, projecting this year is sometimes difficult, but based on the numbers that we have, we can expect that the giving levels are normalizing, particularly as you look at that generationally. Now, if we then look specifically, and today we want to look specifically at giving to the church. So church giving specifically, and also the faith-based giving to organizations that have a faith-based purpose. So if we look at that data, again, we're going to have a look at the dark brown here being giving to a local congregation. So a local church, that's their local church giving. So of the proportion of total giving, and I'll flip back to the slide so you can see it again, 2,600 in 2019. And of the 2,600, you'll see the dark brown line there. So a good chunk of their giving, $1,100 of their giving went to the local congregation. Now, have a look at this. What happens in 2020? Now, we all know what happened through the years of COVID, challenges with meeting together, challenges with engagement of local faith groups. And honestly, we saw that have an impact on giving. The impact was pretty dramatic, from $1,193 to $738. That is a significant reduction. That's the most significant reduction we've ever seen in our research, giving to churches. Typically, giving to local congregations is pretty resilient, even through things like the GFC. That giving to local congregations is resilient. I mentioned before the Jobs Act, which changed the standard deduction for tax-deductible donations. Giving to local congregations weren't affected at all. In fact, there's several other research pieces out there that tell us that giving really didn't take a hit, even though people no longer needed the tax incentives, particularly in the middle tier of giving. They didn't need that tax incentive. They continued to give at significant levels from 2017 to 2018 to 2019. But this COVID thing, as it turns out, did have a significant impact on that giving. However, you can also see in that same year of 2020, during the COVID year, there are many nonprofit organizations, faith-based nonprofit organizations, that did see an increase in giving. So from $329 in 2019, that jumped in 2020, and it was a very good year for those organizations that were parachurch ministries, those who exist for missions, and other media-based organizations that were faith-based. Again, that jump pretty significant year on year, considering that church giving went down so much. To see that proportion of giving go up in 2020. The real question is what's happened since. So we all know what happened through those COVID years. It was very challenging. Engagement was hard, and you'll see a tie in this research. Engagement is directly tied to giving, and we knew engagement was hard in 2020. Well, what's happened since? So since that point, you've seen giving to local congregations increase year on year. And I would say that is the most positive trajectory in all of the trends that we can see here. This is the most positive trajectory that we can see. Now, this, again, you got to remember, these are all of your donors to a local congregation. These are people who attend church regularly. So this group are your core group of supporters. $1,100, we've got a long way to make up from 2020 being only $768 on average per attendee. 2022, that recovery starts. And so we see that even though the total amount given to faith-based organizations and local congregation is pretty similar in total, around the $1,200 amount, the proportion of that giving that's now going back to the local congregation has increased again, which again, you remember in the prior slide, 2022 was the bottoming out of all charitable giving. So by its very nature, the proportion of giving to the local congregation has been prioritized. So keep in mind, if those who are attending your local church are prioritizing their giving to church, well, that means something. And we'll jump into what implications we have later in this presentation. But that does mean something because you are attracting a higher percentage of their total giving. And that matters. And then 2023, again, the continued recovery. Now in 2023, we're almost in a full recovery state. So we're almost right back at 2019. Now, another thing to note about these numbers is this is not inflation adjusted. So unfortunately, we have seen the purchasing power of those same dollars be diminished by 20 or more percentage points over those same 5 years. So I understand from what we can do with the income received through these donations to a local congregation, our purchasing power is diminished, but you've also got to remember from a donor's perspective, their purchasing power is also diminished. So in an environment of heavy inflation, they've chosen to prioritize their church giving. Let me show you one more chart that clearly outlines that percentage. So you can see in 2019, the total proportion of giving to their local congregation was only 45%. Through COVID, that dropped to 31%. Now, many of those donors indicated they gave to things like research and health-based organizations, which naturally makes sense. When there's an emergency need, typically you'll see people of faith give very generously to those things. In 2022, that number jumped to 55%. Now, if you add into that the giving to faith-based ministries, that now jumps to, it's now 68% of their total giving going towards faith-based organizations and their local church, the highest percentage that it's been. Again, in our research history, that's the highest it's been. So although their ability to give more has diminished because of things like inflation, they've chosen to prioritize their faith-based giving. And time again, these donors tell us that they care about their local church. They care about their faith is one of the key drivers and motivators of all of their charitable giving. We also know from other research that they tend to give more than their non-church attending counterparts. So when we compare a non-church attender to a church attender in their total charitable giving, the church attender gives about 6 times more than the non-church attender to all charity, including their church. So again, you can see that prioritization happening there. That's partly engaging with the message of living generously, living beyond yourself. And it creates this kind of priority, which is fantastic to see. You see that in 2023, the total giving number actually starts to recover. And so giving to other organizations has opened up slightly more. But again, that proportion is still very, very high. 51% of the total charitable contributions, which is 6 percentage points higher than pre-COVID levels. 2019, 6 percentage points higher, giving to their local congregation. So fantastic to see that recovery happen and the prioritization of giving at that level. Now, what that means is pretty positive as the available income happens, as we expect that inflation will continue to decline over these next few years, that we won't see the same aggressive levels of inflation. We expect that there'll be more for people to give, and seeing that higher proportion of giving is actually a really encouraging sign.
Hey, Josh, one thing I want to throw in there and mention, because we're talking a lot about engagement throughout the time here today, but I do want to just mention one thing, because if you look back at the overall charitable giving from church attendees, we see 2020 stayed strong, but that giving to churches specifically, there was a significant decline in 2020, and then inversely, 2022. Church giving continues to climb while general charitable giving declines. And I just want to mention, like, that just kind of underscores the engagement aspect that goes along with this. When we look at 2020, people are not physically in church. People are not as connected with their churches. People were still giving giving pretty strong, but they're not giving to their church. And then once, we move past that, we're in 2022, people are back in church like normal. People are connecting with their church again like normal. Then we see, even though overall giving declines, there's a reprioritization of giving to church there. So I think there's just a lot of interesting connection there between how people are likely engaging with their churches throughout these different seasons and how they're prioritizing who they're giving their dollars to.
Yeah, it's a perfect setup, honestly, for the next section, because we want to now look at what does that engagement level look like? Is there a point at which someone is more engaged, and therefore that leads them to be more generous? And the answer is actually yes. So when we look at this group specifically of weekly or more church attenders, so those who are your regulars, they're your rusted on folks, they're the people that are there, whether they're setting up chairs or whether they're volunteering in the youth ministry or in the student ministry or in children's ministry, or whether they are people who are attending your midweek events as well as being there on a Sunday morning. Those people who are engaged at that level, as it turns out, they give more. In fact, not only do they give more to the church, they give more in general. And again, that group is super engaged. And back to your point, Greg, that engagement level, there is no better indicator for someone to prioritize their faith-based giving, someone to prioritize giving above other things. We through COVID, we asked this question: if you were put under pressure financially, what would you give up first? And when we asked that question, we found this group of weekly church attenders were the most likely to say, "Look, giving is an essential. I will give up many, many other things before I give up giving," which is what a fantastic group of people. And anytime I've shown that research outside of the walls of the church and to our secular counterparts, they're always shocked. They're like, wait, there's people who would give up other things in order to maintain their level of giving. And honestly, we can see that through the prioritization of faith-based giving. Many people have, because cost of living has increased pretty dramatically, and they have prioritized giving. They've given up other things in order to maintain their level of generosity, which again is fantastic to see. So when we look at this total giving, the 2019, $3,200 given by the group of weekly church attenders. You remember it's about 2,200 from those who attend monthly. So there's a big difference between a monthly church attender and a weekly church attender at this point. When we look at the levels of engagement, there's an extra $1,000 you throw on the top in terms of their total charitable giving. Again, the prioritization here is a very interesting factor as we dive into what their giving looks like. In 2022, you can see the same pattern. In 2022, we had a decline. The difference with this group is the recovery at the back end in 2023 has been more aggressive. And in 2020, instead of going down slightly, it actually went up. So we saw their support to all ministries that they support and all organizations that they support go up in 2020. Again, that $3,300 being a peak high watermark of all giving from this group. The recovery has almost been complete in 2023. We've seen that jump back up to $3,000. So if you look at that $3,000 mark, and we're slightly above that in 2019, again, slightly above that in 2020. The dip down by about $500 below that mark in 2022 was again the low watermark. So if we're looking at high watermark and a low watermark, we have bottomed out there. And I would expect that giving to recover, as you've seen in 2023. We would expect that in 2024 to continue to recover. As inflation slows down, as more funds are made available for those same donors, as they continue to prioritize their charitable giving, we expect that to continue. Now, there is a role that you play naturally in how do you engage those people, which we want to spend a bit of time in this webinar talking about. But let me just finally look at this slide here. This is their giving to church. So the place of worship, their local congregation, you can see that not only have they recovered their giving from pre-COVID levels, so that $1,670 that they were giving in 2019, they're now giving $1,722. So first of all, that's fantastic. That is a great not only recovery, but increase in their level of engagement and giving. What is challenging about this is how do you have someone engage at a deeper level to be like this group, this special group of donors? How do you have more of the people who are on the fringes of your community, of your church? How do you have them engage with you at a level where every week they're prioritizing this above their local club sport, where they're prioritizing this above other things in their life? So you see this level of engagement and generosity connected together. If you look at so the other interesting thing about this group is we saw a decline in 2020, and yet this group is still giving more in 2020 than most other donor segments to their local congregation. So they're giving $1,084 even in the COVID year, which, if you remember, is much higher than those fringe attendees or the monthly attendees, which, by some standards is still pretty good. If we look at this group specifically, they continue to give solidly through the COVID years. And then in 2023, again, that recovery from 22, 23, it continues to grow and grow and grow. And the proportion of their giving it's very, very similar than what you saw. It's about the 53% that you saw in 2022. And when you add all of their faith-based giving together in 2022 and 2023, it's closer to 80% of their total giving going to their local congregation and to faith-based organizations. These are the people that prioritize their faith-based giving in a significant way because they're so engaged. So if we don't have any questions there, we can head into some of the key findings, Greg.
Yeah, let's keep moving right into those key findings. I think there's a lot of interesting insights that you're about to share into this data.
That's great. So let's stop down on this point. Since 2019, the general church attendees, it has dropped. So in terms of the reports around evangelical giving dropping, we can confirm, yes, overall giving has dropped. Where it's dropped the most is actually in those for those organizations that are not faith-based and not local congregations. So between 2019 to where we are today, the last reporting year being full year being 2023, if we look at the decline in giving over those years, if you were sitting in a higher education institute or a health charity or some other charity, you would be significantly concerned about the drop in giving. If I'm sitting in the chair of a church, I'm actually saying we've seen a full recovery for definitely for those weekly church attenders. For the monthly church attenders, we've almost seen a full recovery in that giving to the local congregation. So realistically, the next years will bring significant growth. From a per donor perspective, we'll see significant growth from those who are engaging at that level. So the articles out there, if you're reading, hey, there's been a massive drop-off in evangelical giving, as it turns out, there has been some decline, but it's been a reprioritization of their giving towards the faith-based things that they really do care about, that at a heart level they connect with. So keep that in mind. If you see those articles flood your feeds with evangelicals aren't giving as much anymore, turns out they're just prioritizing their giving towards churches and their favorite faith-based organizations, which is great. Good to see. When we look at the decline, we also see this rebound. So the other thing to take confidence in this data that we just gone through is that 20% rebound in giving compared to 2022. That 20% it's more significant than most other years in the previous decade of research that we have. So I'm calling it a bottoming out in 2022 because of the aggressive increase that we saw in 2023. Because that increase is so significant, it's far away above other increases that we've seen in previous years. Really, it's a normalization of, yes, we had a very hard inflation year. We had a dramatic increase in cost of living that happened without wages necessarily keeping up. And so you then see in 2023 the recovery of that. In 2024, I expect the next, and we'll have the latest set of data coming in on this, coming here in just a few months' time, we'll likely see that trend continue. It may not be the full 20%, so I can't promise you that in your year end that you're going to see 20, 30% increase in your giving for year end, but I expect it to continue to increase above the pre-pandemic levels.
Now, Josh, as you're talking through this and looking at the increase, does this particular research give any insight to the overall giving units in a church? So like as we've pre-COVID, during COVID, coming out of COVID, our church is seeing more or less, overall people giving, families giving.
So this is done at so an individual will fill in this survey and say, this is how much my household gives towards, and then the household income with the household giving. So thinking of it as a household giving unit. So the household income, that's how we do things like calculate what percentage does the average weekly church attender give to all church, including their charity. And if we look at the current numbers, they give about 2.6% of their total income to all charity, including their church, which means that giving to church is about 1%. Which is not great for a weekly church attender. I think we go about 9% there, hopefully, that we can make up. But when you look at that, I mean, that's like, by the way, just if anyone's got any back of the napkin math, it's about $7 trillion of ungiven in between the 1% and the 10%. So that we could do a little bit more with a little bit more. But we can see it's a giving unit approach. So it's a household who had, there's probably many members of that household who are represented by one person who has done that survey, said, here's what a household income is, here's what a household giving is to all churches, to churches and charities from various different verticals, including faith-based organizations. So that's a way in which the research works out. So it doesn't say so much in terms of how they participate in church, other than saying their attendance records. So really around attendance, we have some linkages in terms of their volunteerism, and we can see those who volunteer are more likely to give more as well. There's a correlation between volunteerism and their connection to giving. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but hopefully that gives some understanding of who these groups are.
Yeah, I think, and another part of that question was I was also asking about. During COVID, it kind of forced the hand of a lot of people that maybe were resistant to online, to digital giving, to finally make that switch. And I think churches in general have seen a positive impact of that, of a higher, a stronger adoption of digital giving. I think of one church in particular that we get to work with that's a fairly good-sized church. And even before the pandemic, I mean, they still had about 60% of their giving coming through their digital giving platforms, and so it was pretty good. But during that time of COVID, they really still continued to teach on giving, to teach biblical stewardship, and they saw people continue to adopt digital giving more and more, continue to adopt online giving, to coming out of the pandemic and being able to continue to build on that momentum to now. Like 90+% of their giving all comes through their digital giving. And when that happens, there's a lot of stability that comes with that, especially when recurring giving is a big piece of that, because giving is no longer tied to in-person attendance. Summer vacation no longer has implications on if someone gives or remembers to give. Having the checkbook or whatever with them on Sunday morning doesn't have those implications anymore. So it's definitely a positive that a lot of churches are seeing the impact of these years coming out of COVID, is more consistency as a result of a much stronger adoption of those digital giving platforms.
And that's, Greg, across generations. So we were nervous about, really was like boomers' silence. Will they ever actually adopt online giving? And as it turns out, they have seen the highest growth in online giving of all of the generations. Now, to be fair, some of the other generations were already at 90% engagement levels in terms of online giving. So they didn't have a lot of room to grow. But in terms of the growth in online giving, it has continued to be a trend that we see the older demographics adopt, particularly through COVID. We saw the adoption of online giving as the primary place for giving, even when receiving communication offline or being in attendance at an event, that the preferred method of response would be online. Again, that's a different mindset, not giving in a plate with a check or some cash in a bucket. Now the preferred method to go online to give, which, as you said, has many benefits, like setting up recurring giving. Like the average gift of it online is much higher than a gift through a check or through the mail. Again, there's significant benefits there, which you will see that growth continue just because of that trend. Now, if you're not ready for that, or if your church is still saying, like, how do we do this best? I mean, Greg, you're always up for a conversation, so I'm sure you'd be
Absolutely.
up for that conversation.
And not to mention, in addition to some of those benefits too, is your admin team. You know, they're saving a lot of hours a week, not manually reconciling checks or cash or whatever, because it's all digitally done for them. One thing I think that's interesting to mention, and someone brought this up in the Q&A, and this goes back, I think, to some of the past research that I know you guys have done leading up to this, that were a little, but the outcomes were focused on some of those generational differences. And if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the interesting things that we've seen is some of the older generations, have shown some decline, or maybe not quite the rebound coming out of COVID, but the younger generations, millennials in particular, have really begun stepping into new levels of generosity, and being that, really showing what people I know for a long time thought was a bleak outlook for churches and nonprofits and charitable organizations, because people thought millennials aren't going to give. But we're seeing the opposite of that, right? Millennials, Gen X, really stepping up and becoming a driving force in giving to the church.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. We've got our latest generational research coming out early next year, which will tell us exactly what has happened. The challenge is, with every generation, you have a unique circumstance. So in terms of boomers, they have started to retire over the last 5 years. We've seen the levels of income decrease. And so even if they're giving out of the abundance that they have, there is a limitation to what income they naturally have to give. In a high inflation environment where there's good significant stock returns, typically you're seeing appreciated assets given. And I know we're going to get to there, but that is if you're not looking at that yet, appreciated assets and giving out of those assets, 95% of wealth is held in assets, by the way. I mean, most people don't have much more than 5% of their wealth held in cash, as in liquid cash. So giving out of that method for boomers particularly is the most significant way, followed by the Gen Xers who still hold more assets than the poor millennial brothers and sisters, who at the moment have had the crunch of the cost of living. So the latest data I have, Greg, and we'll see this come next year. We'll see what has happened since, but we have seen that millennial giving drop back behind the Gen X giving for the first time in this last couple of years. And that's partly because the cost of living, they cite number one is cost of living has increased. I'm paying more for my mortgage. I have a high level of debt. So that's the most indebted generation right now. And when debt costs more, so naturally as interest rates are higher, that has a higher cost of living. So the available funds to give decrease. But the intent to give, the desire to give, and the priority to give towards those faith-based organizations, as you saw in that previous data, we have millennials in there with that group who are prioritizing, even if they don't have more to give, they're prioritizing their faith-based giving above other things, which is now naturally that's going to be the largest generation of our churches. just because it is the largest generation before our younger folks come online and start giving. That is a huge generation. So we are in good hands there. We know that they continue to give strongly. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as the interest rate levels come down, as inflation gets under control. But certainly generational differences are there, and we can see them. But I would, if you haven't gotten onto this already, asset-based giving is going to be huge, particularly for those demographics that have higher levels of appreciated assets, whether it be friends in Gen X who have doubled down on cryptocurrency, or if it's those within your congregations, boomers who have appreciated stock assets. This has been a fantastic year for stocks. So they're going to be in not a great taxable position unless they liquidate some of those. And part of that is giving. So, I mean, you want to be an option there. And we are kind of preempting some of these key takeaways, but that's a really great point. Generationally, that looks different.
And one thing I'll mention just before we move on, just from this kind of side topic we're on, is the older the generation, in most cases, the more attached they are to kind of their traditional way of doing things. And so, I mean, the older the people are, the harder it is to get them to embrace digital platforms. Like that's not any kind of new information. But also, the older the generation, the more likely they are to still want to associate giving with being physically at worship on Sunday, to be physically at church on Sunday. And many churches, I know mine we don't even pass the plate anymore because we rely so heavily on digital giving. And there is still a way people can give cash and check, but it's, by far not the front and center option. So when you're thinking about these older generations, I think you also have to consider they probably do still want to give on Sunday mornings. That doesn't mean you have to go back to passing the plate, but you do need to be, considerate of what are ways that they can engage and give on Sunday morning that is easy for them. Kiosks are a great way to do that because they can just tap in their numbers, tap a card, swipe a card, whatever they want to do. They don't have to scan a QR code. They don't have to go to a website. They're just frictionless giving. So think about, for your specific demographic, what are the frictionless ways that they can give, that you can engage them in giving, to keep every generation as engaged as possible when it comes to giving to your church.
Yeah, that's fun. So QR codes are like the ubiquitously hated boomer device for giving. So yeah. We just know, of all the boomers we surveyed, they all said, I hate QR codes and I never want to have to do that again. So probably don't make that the only way they can give. That's for sure. Keep that frictionless. I love the idea of having something physical in the building, a kiosk, tap and go, easy and present in a building. Like you said, it's embodied, it's there, and it's more usual for their patterns of giving. Really good. And we can see, by the way, as since 2020, as people are back in the building, and increasingly so, we can see that the giving has continued to increase every year. So as we see that embodied meeting together, giving has grown. Giving continues to be prioritized towards churches. Great to be aware of, and great to consider, how do you do more of that? Making it frictionless to give is part of that, but also how does that embodied experience look for encouraged generosity? And then regular church attenders. This is a group of your super fans. These are people who love the Lord, love what their local community is doing, and you can see it in every marker of their behavior. Whether we look at their volunteerism, whether we look at the giving levels, the proportion of their giving to their income, this is a group that is sold out for the mission. So the question is, naturally, how do we have more people engage at this level? And then how do we appropriately challenge this group to continue to give generously? The number I quoted before, I was not making that up. That is legitimate data that I have that says the average weekly church attendant gives 2.6% of their income to all charity, including their church, which means if we take those proportions we saw earlier, 1.3% of their total income to, this is weekly church attendants, by the way. This is our best friends. So there's a big gap there. And the gap in generosity is hurting the mission of the church, naturally hurting the mission of the church. So now there's many ways that we can address that, deal with that. But I think part of it is that level of engagement at a local level. How is it they're involved in every aspect of your church's life. So that's really the key takeaways we've seen from this last 5 years of data. Hopefully give some confidence to you all as you prepare for year end here, as you know, hopefully you can have some confidence that, hey, we're on a trajectory of growth here and you should continue to see that growth. And the question here is, how do you engage more of your congregation for more certainly attenders, volunteerism? How do you engage them with frictionless ways of giving coming to year end, knowing that that'll have a significant impact for your church?
Josh, thank you so much for breaking that info down and breaking all that data down. Like you said, a lot of great insight, a lot of hope for the church. So we want to dive into a few kind of practical takeaways. And I know we've talked a lot about engagement already, and I'm going to harp on engagement just a little bit longer. And some of these things we have already talked about, especially on this first slide here. But we're talking about the kind of the obvious fact that's come out of this is that engagement is directly tied to giving. People who are engaged, people who are invested in your church, or people who are going to invest in your church are going to be more engaged with your church. The most engaged people are the most generous people. And we see that throughout the data. People who attend weekly or weekly and more obviously are giving more. These people who are more engaged, one aspect of that is that your church is top of mind for them. They're constantly connecting with you, so your church is also just top of mind. They're not forgetting about you, and the opportunities that they have there. And also when they're engaged, of course, if their ministry is a priority, if they're willing to give their time to your ministry, if they're willing to give their time to your church, then they are significantly more likely, as we're seeing, to also give financially to the church. So there's a few kind of just aspects of engagement that I want to just kind of point some things out about. So the first thing we're looking at, some key aspects of engagement. One of the things Josh was talking about already is the data pointing to volunteerism and the positive effect that volunteerism has on how people give, how people donate. But we're looking at engagement. We look at people's involvement with small groups and in volunteering. Something that's really interesting to me. One of the things I get to do a good bit is talk to some different church leaders. And I remember one conversation in particular. I was talking with the stewardship pastor of a church. And one of the things he told me was, as they were just evaluating different aspects of their church, one of the things that the correlations they saw that they weren't even looking for is that obviously the more people in small groups equaled more people were giving to the church. But they actually got to the point where they could say, like, if anytime a new small group is added, they actually could project it's going to turn into this amount of giving. And anytime a new person stepped up to lead a small group, they would see that person who was already giving to the church would tend to start giving more and engage even more in that way. Now, to be clear, this church wasn't trying to create small groups to drive revenue. That was not their intent at all. I'm not proposing that should be your intent at all. But when we engage people in things that are positive anyway, volunteering is a positive thing. Getting people in small groups, we know that so much positive impact comes on people's lives through small groups. There's also going to be a side fruit of that you're going to see people really step into giving more. A second piece of this is making sure that it's easy and clear to get involved. People aren't necessarily going to search out a way to get involved. People aren't going to jump through hoops to get involved. So we just have to make sure we make it consistent. We have to make sure that every week we're assuming we're talking to people who are not currently engaged or involved in the church. It's so easy to get up on a Sunday morning or get on social media and assume you're only talking to people that are there every week. But there's people in your sanctuary every Sunday who may be interested in getting plugged in. They may be lonely and they're looking for a group of people to connect with, and they just need that open invitation to come get plugged in, to talk to somebody, whether that's in person on a Sunday morning, making that simple, whether it's through your website, when someone lands there, not making someone dig through page after page to find a way how they can actually get plugged in a little bit deeper to your church. Along with that, consistent communications. Man, you just have to stay connected with people. We, generally have very short attention spans. As time goes on, our attention spans seem to get shorter and shorter. And so as churches, we just have to be very intentional about using social media, using email, using direct phone calls, from volunteer team leaders, that kind of thing, just to make sure we're always consistently communicating with the people in our church and keeping them connected that way. And then when people come for the first time, those first time guests, follow up really, can be so important a first impression, you only get one chance to make that first impression, and first impressions really tend to last. So taking opportunities to make sure you're welcoming first-time guests, make sure you're taking those opportunities to follow up with first-time guests, because that engagement really can start early. And you have an opportunity on day one, your first interaction with them, to begin that process of engaging. I'm not proposing that the first time they visit your church, you're trying to get them to give, or you're trying to get them to volunteer or whatever, but just making sure that they have that good experience that's going to build that groundwork for engaging them and them being involved and them growing in their relationship with Jesus through the way they connect with your church. And then one final piece of this I want to emphasize is providing opportunities for people to connect remotely. People are, in most cases, in your church on Sunday. They're not there Monday through Saturday. So looking at ways you can keep people connected Monday through Saturday, not to mention summer vacations, fall sports schedules, all those crazy things that keep people from being there regularly. Thinking about ways you can use social media, you can use email. Maybe you have a church app, or maybe you should consider adding using a church app as a way to keep people engaging with your content. I mean, one fantastic way to do this is, you've got a sermon that's being preached every week. Take some of those key points, those key snippets that can stand alone, and share those on social media as a way to get people who maybe they were there on Sunday, just keep that information fresh in their minds, and people who missed it, just let them get little snippets of what they missed that Sunday, and just a way of keeping them engaged with your church and with what's going on there. And as, again, people are more engaged, people are going to continue to give. Now, as Josh mentioned, the overwhelmingly vast majority of wealth is held in appreciated assets. And so something that it can be easy to overlook is making it an option to give asset-based gifts. Right now, we're seeing stock and cryptocurrency performing very well. And so there's a lot of benefit for someone to donate cash or cryptocurrency to your church. They can get credit for the full donation of that, without having to pay the tax on the amount that asset has appreciated. So there's a lot of value for them to donate that. And of course, there's tremendous value for your church as well to be able to receive that. But of course, you want to make sure that you keep that simple, both for the giver and for you as an organization that's trying to receive that gift. And something we'll talk more about over these next couple of weeks, in SecureGive, we already have enabled cryptocurrency giving for the last couple of years, and in the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to be launching stock giving within SecureGive as well. And the way this works is people give cryptocurrency or donate stock, but instead of you having to take that Bitcoin or to take that those shares of whatever stock and determine if you're going to hold that or if you're going to go ahead and try to, cash that out. Well, SecureGive, people donate that stock, and actually you just get US dollars straight to your bank account. So the benefit there is it's easy for people to give it, but also for your organization, you don't have to manage stock. You don't have to manage cryptocurrency. For most churches, that's a thing you don't need or want to take on, but being able to have the benefit of it without having to take on those extra management tasks can be really, really beneficial for your church, especially as we're going into this end of year giving season. I'm sure if you work on the financial side of your church, you're very well aware that there's people who are, wanting to make donations up to, the last minutes on December 31st to make sure that they really maximize their benefits, their tax benefit for their donations for the year. So something to really be considering right now is these non-cash gift options like stock and cryptocurrency.
So, and it's probably important to note here that the last time we saw this level of appreciation in cryptocurrency or in stocks, we saw a gigantic lot of these gifts given. And when I say gigantic lot, the average value in the last round of significantly appreciated crypto, the average value of a crypto donation was at 60 grand. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get a lot of 60 grand donations, so don't hear me say that. But we know because of the appreciation, when people bought in crypto and they're saying, my Bitcoin was worth $1,000 and now it's worth $23,000 and today it's worth $80,000. Well, you could see how those gifts in assets, if you're paying tax on the gap between the $1,000 and the $80,000, that's a lot. But if I can use that for good and I want this community to be funded through that gift, and there's a tax benefit to me in doing that, it's a natural one. So just be aware, this year is the year that you should absolutely be promoting that. It should be something that's just natural as part of your suite of ways in which people can give. So great point, Greg. I'm glad you pointed that out for everyone here.
Now, as we're getting close to wrapping up this year and you're starting to think into the beginning of next year, we see people are prioritizing their faith-based giving over other giving, but you as an organization, as a church, still need to make sure you prioritize impact reporting. So basically what we mean is you want to make sure that whether it's an annual report or maybe you call it an impact report, that you're showing what your church has accomplished over this past year as a result of giving. And this is going to be particularly important for some of the younger generations, millennials in particular, who are much more motivated to give to a cause than they are to give to an organization. They're not necessarily just going to keep giving because they've always given to this or because giving to the church is what you're supposed to do. They are more likely to be motivated to give to a cause that they believe in. And in doing this, you also have an opportunity to connect all the dollars that have been given this past year directly to the results. So as you're doing this, you're essentially kind of showing a value in the investment that people are making in your church, that dollars equal outcomes. And as you do this, you also are building credibility in how you manage money. You're transparently showing people that, hey, this past 12 months, we've taken in X number of dollars and we've been able to do all these things with it. And it shows people that your organization, your church is a place that can be trusted and a place that is really worth them donating their money to. So a very important aspect of that is building the trust. And of course, as we're getting very close to December, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. December, end of year giving is still the largest giving opportunity of the year. It's estimated that 30+% of all charitable giving happens just in December alone. But there's some unique challenges with that, because not only do churches realize that, every charitable nonprofit organization is trying to figure out how they can engage people in giving to their organization, especially at the end of the year. So it's for lack of a better term, it's a more competitive time to get those donations, and there's just a lot more noise. And so as we do that, we just have to be very conscious of keeping people, again, engaged, keeping that consistent communication, so people are connecting with you and not letting your message be drowned out by all the noise that's around them, the commercials that they see, the people knocking on their door, putting mailers in their mailbox. And because of that, this end of year time is so important to really be mindful of engagement. It's a time where people get busy. And even though you're ramping up for a huge Christmas Eve service, with the biggest, probably attendance numbers of the year, in general, season wide, it can be a tricky time to keep people involved because people are all over the place. They got holiday parties, work parties, they're, Christmas shopping. They're spending maybe too much money on Christmas. And so they're thinking, maybe I got to pull back somewhere. Maybe it's going to be my giving. So this is an important time to keep people engaged because, again, as we've seen over and over again, and we've drilled this point to the ground, greater engagement leads to greater generosity. And then, of course, make it clear. Make these opportunities really clear. People need to be able to clearly see why they should give to your church. And just as much, they need to be able to clearly see how they can give to your church. So do not miss out on the end of year giving opportunity that is ahead of you this year. Now, as we kind of wrap this up, we've answered a lot of questions as we go. If you have any more questions you want to throw in here, please, we have a couple more minutes to do that. We'll wrap it up. One thing I want to ask you, Josh, is because you've talked about in the news, everybody's kind of pitching bad news about giving, about what people can expect to see. So what is just kind of in a broad sense, we've seen what's happening in church giving. How does that compare to overall charitable giving? Not necessarily by church attendees. I know that's not an area of research for this particular study, but I know this is a topic you are consistently focused on and watching. So how would you compare those two?
Yeah, in inflation adjusted terms, giving overall has been down for a couple of years. It's been a difficult couple of years for the charitable sector in its broadest sense. Now there are some areas of growth. So giving from donor advised funds, for instance, giving to donor advised funds has grown. But in terms of direct giving to charitable organizations, that in overall that has in inflation adjusted terms been going down. Giving to religion, if you look at that segment, has also had a decline. If you look at I've got 3 Giving USA. That's a really great resource. If you haven't seen that one, Giving USA is probably the benchmark research out there, which looks at every single category of giving, including giving to religion, which is obviously this category that we've dived into today. But it is difficult in the inflationary environment to see increases in real dollar terms in giving, because once you adjust for inflation, you're taking, at the high end of inflation where we're at 8%, you're taking 8% off your total giving. And when you're talking about billions of dollars given, that's hard to make up in real terms.
Yeah. Well, I want to just give a couple things as we wrap this up here today. First of all, thank you, Josh, so much. Thank you to the Dunham Company team for the research you guys are doing year over year in bringing this data to us. A couple things I just want to make sure everybody's aware of as we close this out today. First of all, you'll get an email from us in the next day or so. We'll give you a recorded copy of this webinar, but also there's a research piece that this conversation is really all based around. So we're going to send you that full research piece as well, so you can read that, you can share that. We want to make sure we get that into your hands. Looking kind of down the pipeline a little bit, I know I talked earlier about non-cash giving and SecureGive, cryptocurrency giving, stock giving. First of all, if you want to already be ready to go to add that as soon as it's available, the very beginning of December, let us know. Just head over to securegive.com/non-cash. Again, securegive.com/non-cash. You can just fill out a form, and we'll just make sure day one, as soon as stock giving is available, you will have access actually to both stock giving and cryptocurrency giving for free for this end of year season. So you just want to make sure as many people, as many churches as possible are prepared to accept cryptocurrency and stock gifts this year, because we believe it's really going to be a big thing. It's going to be a difference maker for churches. So again, securegive.com/non-cash. Also, December 5th at 2 p.m., we're going to be having another webinar where we will be talking specifically about non-cash giving and end-of-year giving. So what do you need to know about cryptocurrency stock giving as it pertains to end-of-year giving? And we've got some guests joining us that are really experts in that field of non-cash giving specifically. And so we're going to be diving into that December 5th at 2 p.m. Again, tomorrow in that email, we'll give you a link if you want to sign up for that as well. And I really want to encourage you. I know some of you that are part of this webinar today have already been working with Dunham Company, and you already know those folks. If you don't, I really want to encourage you to take a look at them, check out what they're doing. In tomorrow's email, follow-up email, there's going to be a link in there where you can basically get into their communication list, so you can be getting any research they're doing. You can consistently be getting those updates throughout the year. And there's lots of great things that they're doing. And one of the things that we as SecureGive, we always look for in organizations we partner with is organizations that legitimately are in it for the best interest of the local church. And I can 100% say that is the heart and the attitude behind Dunham Company. So if you've never connected with these guys, definitely take the opportunity to do that. I want to again say thank you to Josh for joining us today. Thank you for everybody who's watched this live and asked questions and been a part of this today. And know that we are praying for an incredible end of year season for you. We believe that we are just seeing the beginning of great things for the church as things have improved over 2023. But we're going to see continued growth. And we believe that, and we're praying that over your church. So have a great rest of your week, a great Thanksgiving week, and we're praying for a fruitful holiday season for you.